At the climax of King Ormad's reign, Gurubad became a city that was laden with high towering statues and buildings. A capital city worthy of the King of Kings in the region of Sumeru. However, this could all be credited to the power which his betrothed, a powerful djinn named Lilipar, gave him. Regarding the djinn Lilipar, we made numerous errors on the last video of this series, raising more questions than answers. Although it took a long time to correct these errors, we wanted to cover everything that has been revealed in the past versions of the game, so as to prevent any more confusion. The world of Genshin Impact is vast and full of interesting lore and stories, but in this video, we hope to cover only the desert region of Sumeru and retell the real events that happened here, from the death of Nabu Malikata to the first fall of Gurubad. We hope it will now give a clear look at this region's story. Nearing the end of the reign of the three god kings, Ormazd was once just a shepherd who roamed the desert plains of Sumeru. At this time, Huvashta the Tyrant grew to power and enslaved most of the people in the area. Ormazd was one of these people and suffered under this unjust ruler. Not wanting further misery upon his people, King Deshret graced Ormazd to rebel and depose Huvashta the Tyrant from his legitimate place. After overthrowing Huvashta the Tyrant, Ormazd met and fell in love with Lilipar, a djinn sent by King Deshret, and helped him build the city of Gurubad, gathering the scattered tribes in the desert in the process. The city of Gurubad was then built, and as recognition of his gifted power, Ormazd devoted himself to worshipping King Deshret and his wisdom. He lent all his powerful builders and slaves to help construct King Deshret's mausoleum, one of the wonders that cemented the legacy of Deshret in Sumeru. Throughout the years, Ormazd became recognized as the King of Kings and established a golden reign across Gurubad and his other lands. He and Lilipar also married and had a daughter named Shirin. Bearing the weight of being a renowned king, Ormazd gradually turned into a tyrant, displaying signs of oppression within his domain. As a result, Lilipar grew to slowly hate Ormazd, and rightfully so. This was because the humble and kind shepherd she once looked up to turned into one of those kings she despised the most. As a matter of fact, King Ormazd maintained slavery across Gurubad, which Lilipar did not take lightly. Despite having an heir to take over his throne once he passed, King Ormazd took on a warrior, Kisra, as his adoptive son. King Ormazd ordered Kisra to go to the various tribes and kingdoms of the desert and conquer them for him. As recognition for Kisra's efforts, King Ormazd offered him the title of Parvez and the hand in marriage to his daughter, Shirin. Kisra and Shirin had no love for each other and were only together for the sake of bearing a son. Shirin did have a son named Shiruya, and she did taught him of the vile actions that King Ormazd did during his reign. For Shirin, she also grew to hate her father, and would eventually convince Kisra to murder her father and all her siblings so that he could take the throne himself, thus fulfilling the third prophecy from Lilipar. Kisra was fortunate in killing King Ormazd, taking the throne of Gurubad. However, she was afraid that his son, Shiruya, would fulfill the second part of Lilipar's prophecy. So Kisra had Shiruya exiled to the desert, forcing him to wear a brass mask to hide his face in hopes that no one would recognize him. Nevertheless, Shirin would eventually find Shiruya, taking on the name of Khorramdin. During their secret meeting, Shirin tried to convince him to murder Kisra and take the throne, but Shiruya remained unsure of what his mother was asking. At the height of Kisra's reign, he only wanted power that could hope to surpass what King Ormazd once had. So he turned to his mother, Lilipar, for guidance. Unable to reject his requests, Lilipar created devices powered by djinn spirits, which were primal constructs, and sent them to Kisra. Later, in a dream, he gave him the notion to build a huge machine to generate them in large quantities. These machines brought Kisra great fortune, and he supposedly abolished slavery for the betterment of Gurubad. The djinn who worked inside these machines were developed by Shirin, whose insanity caused the djinn to be made mindless and malformed. But since the djinn machines were now doing the work of the slaves, there was a great socio-economic divide since the previous slave owners, no longer needed to maintain a workforce of human laborers, and the former slaves had no way to support themselves. All of this was a part of Lilpar's schemes, as she was the one who had raised Shiria and Kisra and wanted to manipulate them into an ensuing war. Hearing the cries from Gurubad's slaves, Shiria committed to deposing Kisra and soon led an uprising against him. This was known as the Brass Mask Rebellion and plunged Gurubad into a state of calamity and conflict. Eventually, Shiria was nearly triumphant, but Lilipar, who had used the power of the Dark Abyss, cemented Shiria's victory, which resulted in the deaths of his supporters and the people of Gurubad, as the city itself sank into a deep chasm. The matter of Kisra's death isn't clear. According to Eremite tradition, he was killed in his bedchambers by Shiria, yet in Lilipar's memories, he transformed into a horrible monster. King Deshret learned of what happened at Gurubad and decided to punish Lilipar for her mischievous deeds against her husband and her sons. So Deshret split her souls into pieces of 7, wherein the most dominant soul would be kept at Lilipar's cell. The events where King Deshret sacrifices himself takes place after this, as the 7 obelisks implies that during the War of the 7 Cities, all of it took place after his death. In the aftermath of Gurubad's destruction, the once vassal cities now vied for dominion over Sumeru, as each ruler sought to become the new king of kings. Hostilities rose among these cities as disorder continued to emerge within the region. In the years that followed, Gurubad was left to its ruin up until Kavusbai, the son of Shiria, returned from his exile. During the time when Shiria was himself exiled, it seems that he started a new family and even had a son. Shortly after winning the Brass Mask Rebellion, a plague struck the surviving people of Gurubad and named this phenomenon as Shiria's Plague. This in turn resulted in a bad light for Shiria's legacy, affecting his son's reputation. This resulted in Kavusbai getting exiled, as the people of Gurubad did not want any more calamities happening due to Shiria's ancestors. Yet years later, Kavusbai still returned to Gurubad and decided to sit on the throne his father once fought for valiantly. However, to his surprise, the throne that he sought for was now occupied. Sitting on it was Sharamshar, one of the great sages of Gurubad. To this point in the story, it was never revealed what happened between them. If Kavusbai was killed during his return, all we know from the primal obelisks was that Sharamshar continued to reign, and he even had a son named Artaxir who ascended his throne after he died. It depends whether Hoyoverse will shed some light into these events, but as for now, all we currently believe is that Kavusbai was killed because he was a threat to Sharamshar's claim to the throne. Moving on, in Sharamshar's reign, he rebuilt the city of Gurubad, which was a tactical move on Ramshar's part, because what better way to cement your authority as King of Kings than by reclaiming an ancient lost capital? Among the cities of Gurubad, other cities such as Tulaitula, Saleh, Organa, Beitraha, and Ikonim continued to prosper by this point, and each one was ruled by a king, paying tribute and homage to Sharamshar's status. Saleh is a city home to the Thamudians, who were known for their golden eyes. This city is believed to have stood in the domain of City of Gold, near the ruins of Kajnisut, and was ruled by Turan Kagan during Sharamshar's reign. Tulaitula, home to the Tainarians, known for its sapphire domes and garden-esque architecture, located at where the domain Garden of Endless Pillars now stands, ruled by the king Humayun Gur Khan. Then Ikonim, believed to have been rebuilt after King Deshret's death, at that time was ruled by the king Garshasp. Next is Organa, present-day Port Ormuz, a haven built by the pirate leaders called as the Alliance of the 29 Days. Then Betraha, a city we barely know about, but still was mentioned in the primal obelisks and could be mentioned again in future books. As for the 7th city, we still have no information on this, but a clue could be where Aktamun, a present-day Aru village, now stands. Going back to Sharamshar, he eventually had a son named Artaxir and a daughter who remains nameless. We know little of what happened during these times, but it is believed that in his reign, his kingdom suddenly experienced a crisis. Reading a quote mentioned by Sharamshar before his death, he says, "In 3 days I shall die, and the kingdom shall be plunged into unending chaos." Now, we believe that there could have been a problem in choosing the next heir to the throne. With no established successor, anyone could present themselves as worthy to take the position, but in the next lines from the Primal Obelisks, it was mentioned that Artaxir soon became the new king, with Turin Kagan as his regent. We believe that a regent was needed because Artaxir was still too young to rule and needed to be counseled as he came of age. However, in the lines that followed, he never did come of age, as Artaxir is no longer mentioned, and could be because Turin Kagan dethroned him, or either killed him to better solidify his claim to the throne. This explains why there was a traitor written above his name, as implied in the Primal Obelisks. Then, the king of Tulaitula, Humayun Gurkhan, seemed to have avenged Artaxir and reclaimed the throne for his own, while also marrying the daughter of the deceased king Sharamshar. He killed Turin Kagan and 3 of his sons, so that none will oppose his position in the years to come. Humayun Gurkhan ruled as the new king of kings, and moved his capital to Saleh, but was short-lived, as a tragic event had begun, which was known as the Jin Uprising. In this event, Humayun Gurkhan was decapitated at his capital city of Saleh, which forced an alliance of 30 kings to oppose this mutiny. Unfortunately, the forces that organized this Jin uprising were too much to handle for the alliance of the 30 kings, as they were all killed and their armies defeated. It was indicated that this Jin uprising continued on for years, ravaging the city-states. Fortunately for them, the king of Iconium at that time, Garshasp, miraculously managed to defeat all the bandits. His steadfast reputation soon spread across the remaining kings, in which they all declared him as their new king of kings. This change in power renamed him to Muazzam Kagan, or the Kagan of Kagans. As his first act as king of kings, he relocated to Iconium as his capital and tried to establish a long dynasty to last. However, another unfortunate event happened, as another rebellion soon stirred within Iconium, and somehow Garshasp was killed with his capital city, burning for 7 days. This could explain why the city of Iconium is no longer mentioned in the following Primal Obelisks. The survivors of this attack soon fled to Tulaitula, the nearest city they could go to for refuge. Because they lost all their belongings in the recent attack, they accepted any jobs that they could find, such as entertainers, craftsmen, or even servant of nobles in Tulaitula. With the death of Garshasp, the future of his remaining people becomes uncertain, as well as their city remaining unavenged, as the rebels would continue to burn and pillage their way throughout Sumeru. For some unknown years later, the traders who burned Iconium were now on the offensive as they tried to take Tulaitula and finish what they started. They besieged the Sapphire City, but luckily, Tulaitula's defense was spearheaded by a man named Godars. At this point in time, one of these traders who burned Iconium was being led by Godars' younger brother. For 3 days, the city's defenders stood tall against the traders with an already depleted source of supplies and exhausted men. However, it's noted that without Godars' help, Tulaitula could have already fallen into their hands. The siege turned into a stalemate between the two sides. Suddenly, with some type of unknown power, Mirage was described to have appeared and rose from its sleep. This Mirage aided Godars in fighting off the traders and soon secured their victory. After this event, the Mirage was never mentioned again, but we believe that it was a ghost of a powerful spirit, maybe a Jinn, or maybe a powerful ancient being that once existed in the deserts of Sumeru. But we would like to know your thoughts on who or what this is. Now, continuing on, after Godars' victory against the traders, he decided to march on to Gurubad after his younger brother fled there after the stalemate siege. However, to his surprise, his arrival was met with little resistance as he entered into Gurubad as the victor and brought the war to a close. The Primal Obelisks refers to Gurubad as a place where the winds of lamentation had long howled, which we believe to reference its long and bloody history. After some time, Godars relocated more of his surviving people to Gurubad and changed his name to King Salib-Dowleh, believing that he was blessed by King Deshret himself. So, as a result, he ordered the construction of statues of both King Deshret and himself all over the newly rebuilt city of Gurubad. In the years that followed, there was peacetime, and it was termed as the Fine Rain at Sunset. This peace lasted for 10 years, up until another war began when King Salib-Dowleh's son, Prince Hajir, was poisoned during a banquet. To serve as punishment, he ordered hundreds of nobles to drink the poisoned wine, while also burying his son's dead body alongside thousands of slaves to serve him in the afterlife. To sidetrack for a bit, this tradition is similar to how ancient Egyptians also handled the deaths of their nobles or rulers, wherein their concubines and slaves were buried alongside their bodies in the belief that their souls would continue to serve their masters until the end. Going back, after this treacherous act, King Salabdala began warring with the nobles who he believed to have poisoned his son. This lasted for an unknown amount of years, but all we know is that at the same time, King Salabdala was also at war with the city of Organa. As a context, Organa was raiding King Salabdala's lands for years during his reign, hurting their supply sources and being a threat to the citizens' safety. As payback, King Salabdala in turn pillaged their ships and burned any lands that belonged to Organa. This somehow continued for a long duration up until the leaders of Organa had grown wary of war and sent tribute to Gurubad asking for peace. To solidify their pact, King Salabdala decided to invite 2 of the Days of Organa to come feast with him in the city of Gurubad. Surprisingly, one of the Days accepted his invite and left King Salabdala gracious that their people would finally settle for peace. However, in his blind-sightedness for peace, fire, and destruction were the one that arrived at his doorsteps, and instead of settling in with pen and paper, it was ended with the clash of swords and the spilling of blood. On a warm morning, the clear sky above the outskirts of Bedraha announced the start of a pleasant summer day. Some 50,000 inhabitants of the city-state, located close to the mouth of the ravine, started their daily routines. By noon, native farmers dotted the open fields, casting their seeds just off the meadows, and a horrifying sight appeared on the horizon. A vast array of troops, high towering mechanisms, and the sound of hooves heading towards the city. The unexpected invasion of Organa had finally come. Before we continue with the invasion, let us first explore the history behind the city of Organa. Now, according to legends mentioned by the researcher Faranaz, Organa was established by 29 pirate lords and named their union as the Alliance of the 29 Days. At some point, Organa was attacked by a sea beast that ended in the death of the Alliance. However, we believe that some survived this event and rebuilt the city. As for their politics, Organa is ruled by 2 powers in which, during the time of Salabdala, Organa was ruled by the infamous Muzaffar Dey alongside an unnamed pirate lord. Muzaffar rose to power over the other Dey, wherein the primal obelisks refer to him as kin uncle to the beasts of the sea. So perhaps this is where the legend of the sea boat began. This could reference the Roman Republic, as it was known that they appointed 2 consuls to share the governance of Rome. This was because they despised the notion of kings and did not want a single person to have too much power. In the case of Organa, knowing that it was first established by pirate lords, they too did not want the notion of a single person having all the power in governing their city. With that said, when King Daulis sent a message to Organa for a meeting, it was Muzaffar Dey who accepted the invite, and unknowingly to King Daulis, he had other intentions for going to Gurubad. As Muzaffar Dey prepared to venture out from Organa, he brought out all his experienced warriors, siege equipment, and whole mercenary army to march all the way to Gurubad. So, as he marched to the magnanimous city, he solidified his title as being the infamous pirate lord by pillaging the towns and villages along the way. It seems that the obelisk details Muzaffar Dey's conquest to neighboring lands. He mostly met little resistance in the petty armies that opposed him. It was in the city of Bedraha where he encountered his first real battle. We know little about the city of Bedraha, but reading from the primal obelisks, it was implied that it was famed during its time. Maybe this is why Muzaffar Dey wanted to besiege the city, as taking it would increase his fame across the region. So, as the Organa army encamped themselves outside Bedraha, they prepared to deliver a swift attack in order to shock the defenders and enable them to call for reinforcements. Sharpening their curved swords and loading their towering catapults with rocks, the men prepared for the final order to be given. When the day ended at last, the city was finally taken. The soldiers of Organa sacked the city, burning it to the ground. At the same time, Muzaffar Day beheaded the ruler Nazrul and presented his head to his remaining family members and his army. From the primal obelisks, it was mentioned that Muzaffar Day even made a mockery of their dead king, laughing and celebrating amidst the sound of screaming people and burning houses. The surviving people of Beitraha were also taken into slavery, of which 3,000 of them became slaves for the Organa army. With his command, he orders the daughter of Nasrul, named Nazira, to serve as a puppet ruler, all while paying tribute and declaring him as their vassal king. And so, with minimal casualties to the Organa army, it was a massive victory that sent fear to the remaining cities along the way, including Gurabad. Following this attack, messengers hastily traveled to Gurabad to bring the news and inform King Salib Dawle of an upcoming invasion. He turned furious and worried as he hadn't had enough men to repel the incoming invaders, so he decided to call for his younger brother who had fled earlier and join their armies for a final stand against Muzaffar Day. He assembled his army behind the city walls, dug ditches around the perimeter, and stored enough supplies for a long and weary siege. As the days went, more news arrived that the Organa army was nearing their position. When the sun sets across the horizon, the sound of marching and creaking catapults can be heard from afar. Finally, Muzaffar Day and his army arrived. It is late evening. King Salib Dawle anxiously waits with his army. In front of Gurabad's city walls, his army equipped with long curved swords, axes, halberds, crossbows, and fistblade soldiers had set up camp, fully intending to meet the Organa army in battle. The rulers of the city-state had been invited to Gurabad for a peace treaty between the two territories. However, Organa had used the ceasefire for the success on the battlefield to expand their territory and influence across the deserts of Sumeru. Many of Gurabad's former allies were now eliminated and conquered, most of them pillaged and burned to the ground. As Gurabad's standard flew above the formations of the coalition between King Salib Dawle and his younger brother, the much smaller Organa army of grizzled veterans appeared on the horizon, commanded by the infamous Muzaffar Day. Having received reports that Muzaffar Day's army were tired from previous battles and lacked supplies, the coalition leadership was confident. King Salib Dawle addressed that Gurabad would soon lack its freedom because of these invaders who would enslave and burn the city under their yoke, insisting that now at this place was the time to expel them once and for all. As both sides prepared for the ensuing battle, King Salib Dawle encouraged his troops, confident that with his overwhelming numbers, his army would achieve victory. Encamped just by a small oasis, Muzaffar Day split his army into 3 divisions and ordered his troops to begin advancing on his signal. With the signal given, the catapults began bombarding the city with fire, while the first group advanced towards the city together with their siege towers and battering ram. The defending army volleys the attackers with arrows and rocks and helps stall their advance, while parts of the siege towers kept catching fire. The Organa soldiers would, however, frantically extinguish them. Finally, the first group reached the wall. Despite being outnumbered at the top, Muzaffar Day's experienced troops remained steadfast, pushing their way onto the wall. As the fight continued, the Organa continued advancing against the Gurabad center, seizing the high ground. Retreating behind the city walls, the army of Gurabad was diminished to only a fourth of its original count, causing them to be the ones outnumbered this time. Muzaffar Day, not wanting to give the defenders any time to respite, ordered a full assault and barrage against the city. The catapults hurled their fiery load as the remaining Organa army assaulted the city. After a brief siege of the city, the Organa army entered its gates, killing and enslaving its inhabitants. At the same time, they too captured King Dawle and presented him to Muzaffar. Same with what they had done in Beitraha, King Dawle's family were all killed. To his satisfaction, Muzaffar ordered his men to burn the city for King Dawle to witness until finally killing him. With the defeat of Gurabad's forces, Muzaffar Day now had the remaining kings in his grasp, seemingly winning a great victory for Organa. This most incredible feat had the rest of Sumeru on its knees. However, when asked by his men if they should go home, Muzaffar Day did not want to return back to the harbor city, but instead decided it was time to move east into the great expanse of Sumeru, where he would build a new city and establish himself as the sole ruler. In just a few years, Muzaffar Day had risen to become the High King of Sumeru, stationed in his new capital city, holding claim to the cities of Beitraha, Saleh, Gurubad, and Tulaitula. Later on, he would have two sons named Zumurud and Badana, with Zumurud growing up to be known as the Verdant Lord. As the sons came of age, Muzaffar appointed his eldest son, Zumurud, to be the heir of his capital, while his other son, Badana, would rule the cities of Saleh and Tulaitula. When Muzaffar Day died and Zumurud finally became king, he had 99 sons and daughters, and the capital would surprisingly experience years of peace. According to the primal obelisks, Zumurud was a native of the forest and did not speak the language of the desert. This also implies that Muzaffar is also from the forest then, which adds validity to the concept that Organa and Port Ormuz are in fact the same. This is perhaps why he was called the Verdant Lord. The primal obelisks also make mention of the prince's Hanzada Sultan. At this point in history, it seems that Zumurud's dynasty was making an effort to incorporate the history of the desert people. As it notes, Zumurud's realm was as indestructible as the mausoleum of King Deshret. While Zumurud ruled with a gentle hand, Badana meanwhile ruled as a tyrant over his cities. He was a selfish king who satiated himself with feasts and wine, often hunting all day rather than ruling over his subjects. To top that, he would also fight wars with other kingdoms and hoard the loot for himself, kinda similar to another fictional king from an extremely known book series. Now, going back, in the city of Tulaitula, a visitor from afar named Sifos suddenly arrived at the city gates. Throughout the months subsequent to his arrival, he rose to become a renowned hero due to his gifted skill of handling a double-edged sword, claimed to have been blessed by a genie. In his accomplishments, a sword dancer fell in love with him, and they both became lovers. The sword dancer was named Makaira. However, the romance was cut short as the scholars who ruled over Tulaitula offered her as tribute to the obese king, Badana, in exchange for a peaceful interaction between the two kingdoms. When Makaira first arrived at Saleh, she presented a sword dance in front of the king. While Badana was in awe of her prowess and ferocious presentation, he wasn't the only one that caught attention. His son, Faramars, also caught her attention and became infatuated. Makaira took note of this, and even though she was the mistress of Badana, she used her charm to seduce his son Faramars and plotted behind his back. Over the years, the two developed an affair without the knowledge of Badana. Then it was here when Makaira took the opportunity to lay a plot against Badana in retribution to how his tyranny was ruining Makaira's home of Tulaitula, and in turn, make herself a queen with Faramars as her king. Unfortunately, the sword Makaira Aquamarine notes that she failed to become queen in the end. In the next events, it is quite difficult to correspond the details from the weapon and the ones in the primal obelisks. All we believe so far is that Faramars was forced to abdicate to his uncle, Balash, the master of Tulaitula. Faramars' other uncle, Goraz, would raise an army to restore Faramars to the throne, and Goraz and Makaira would rule as co-regents. However, Goraz then went on to wed Makaira and claim the throne for himself, exiling Faramars in the process. In the Makaira Aquamarine, we could guess that the tyrant in the sword story was Goraz, and the prince was Faramars. This led to another rebellion by the nobles of Tulaitula, who sought revenge for the death of Balash. Makaira appears to have then murdered Goraz as she handed his head over to the rebels. King Faramars was, once again, welcomed back. This was short-lived, as the city of Saleh then rebelled, which led to an all-out battle for the throne. This conflict was eventually settled with Faramars being restored to the throne yet again, only to be overthrown a final time by the slave warriors and city dwellers. This time, Faramars was exiled to the forest, specifically Dharma Forest. In the final primal obelisk, it records the end of the sad tale of incessant war in the cities of the Seven Towers. The writer appears to be educated, so likely raised in a time of stability, but has fallen on hard times. The author notes that the vast lands have given rise to many who would dare to be king, and yet no one person managed to rule it all. They make reference to the fall of Gurubad and how all that followed was conflict. The author mentions that their king is in exile in the forest. While no name is mentioned here, we could guess the author only refers to Faramars. Then the author swears off mortal kings, saying the people of the desert will leave behind the palaces of old and make a new home named Aru Village, in honor of the ancient dream of the gods where they will await the return of Al-Akmar, which still exists to this present day. As the saying goes, we desert folk shall leave the ruins and palaces we have grown used to living in. We shall make a new home for ourselves at the edge of this land. That place we shall name Aru, after the ancient dream of the gods, and there we shall quietly wait for Alakmar's revival. Picking up the story of Faramars, the Kajnisu Primal Obelisk statement, the tower that caused the death of the previous king Badana has been destroyed, and the haunting falcons were all buried alongside him, matches the story of the lost prince of the desert as told in the artifact set Lamp of the Lost from the Deepwood Memories. The prince claims father ascended the tower in pursuit of a falcon, and the ancient structure could not bear his great weight, casting him into the boiling quicksand. This suggests that the prince in the lamp is, in fact, Faramars. The lamp also says, "In those days, I too had someone to love. She longed to be queen, but did not concern herself with the identity of the one seated on the throne." This matches Makaire's agenda, both on Makaire's Aquamarine and on the Kajnisut Primal Obelisk. The lamp goes on to tell how the prince fled to Dharma Forest, hoping to conquer new lands there, but instead fell into a game of cat and mouse with a white huntress. This is further detailed by the wandering Avenstar. It is also quite possible that Faramars is the wanderer mentioned in Cyphus' Moonlight weapon, as all three weapons are from the same series. Heeding the warnings of the White Huntress, Faramars chose to embrace his fate and eventually died in the woods, marking the official end of Muzaffar Day's dynasty. Finally, the three weapons, Makaire's Aquamarine, Wandering Evenstar, and Cyphus' Moonlight all have the same opening. This story takes place thousands of years ago, suggesting that the death of King Deshret, the intervention of Rukkhadevata, and all the conflict that followed predates the calamity by millennia. Well, that wraps up the War of the Seven City-States. We're really sorry for holding back on this video for months, as we didn't have enough time to animate the scenes throughout the video. Now, if you have more to add to the story, feel free to do so in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, my name is KlemenTime. Till the next one, be safe and stay tuned.